The rain in Chicago doesn't just fall, it performs. Tonight. It was putting on a show, slicking the concrete of the West Loop with a black mirror that shattered the neon blues and purples of the Aurora Collective's annual fundraiser. I stood just inside the massive, repurposed warehouse, a flute of flat champagne in my hand that I hadn't touched. The air was thick with the scent of damp wool coats, expensive perfume, and the low hum of conversations I was paid to understand but not to join. My name is Aria Quintana. By day, I'm a freelance data journalist, chasing down threads of digital corruption that usually lead to dead ends. By night, and whenever the rent was due, I was a ghost, an English to Italian interpreter, a voice that existed only to bridge the gap between two worlds without belonging to either. Tonight, I was the shadow of a flamboyant Italian sculptor named Nico, a man whose art was as loud as his personality. My job was simple: translate his passionate ramblings about form and void into palatable soundbites for Chicago's moneyed elite. The crowd was a sea of tailored suits and glittering dresses, faces I recognized from society pages and financial reports. They moved with the easy confidence of people who didn't just own rooms, but entire city blocks. And watching them all from a cantilevered steel balcony above the main floor was a man who seemed to own the very air they breathed. I hadn't seen him arrive, but his presence had shifted the room's gravity. He was still a silhouette against the floor-to-ceiling window that looked out onto the storm-lashed city. He held a glass of dark liquor, the amber liquid catching the light like a captured flame. My phone vibrated in the small clutch purse looped around my wrist, a restricted number. I ignored it. Nico was in the middle of a grand gesture, describing his latest masterpiece to a potential patron. I was mid-sentence, turning his flowery Italian into a more grounded English explanation, when the phone buzzed again, insistent. A second call from the same number meant one thing: Aunt Sophia. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. Sophia only called twice if the world was ending. I murmured a quick "scusi, un momento" to Nico and his patron, stepping away from the small circle. My professionalism screamed at me to go outside, to find a quiet corner. But the urgency of that second call overrode everything. I turned my back to the crowd, seeking a sliver of privacy near a concrete pillar, and answered. Zia che succeed. The Italian flowed out of me without thought, a language of home, of panic. My aunt's voice was a frantic torrent on the other end, a story about my cousin, a stupid mistake, and the need for bail money I didn't have. I listened, my own voice dropping to a low, soothing murmur, responding in the dialect of our family, a soft, Neapolitan-inflected Italian that was worlds away from the crisp, formal language I used for work. Stai calma, no, non ti preoccupare, lo risolverò, te lo prometto. I promised to figure it out, a promise I had no idea how I would keep. When I finally ended the call, the knot in my stomach had grown into a cold, heavy stone. I took a breath, preparing to slip back into my professional skin, and turned. That's when I saw him. The man on the balcony was no longer a silhouette. He was leaning forward slightly, his gaze fixed directly on me. The distance was significant, maybe 50 feet, but I could feel the weight of his attention like a physical touch. His eyes were dark, and even from here, they seemed to burn with a chilling, analytical light. He knew. He had heard. He had understood every single word. He held my gaze for a beat, then slowly, deliberately, he tilted his glass in a gesture that was not a toast, but an acknowledgement, an assessment. Then he gave a nearly imperceptible nod to a man standing in the shadows behind him. My heart hammered against my ribs. A professional slip-up of this magnitude was unforgivable. I had spoken in a private tongue in a public space, filled with powerful people, revealing a part of myself I kept fiercely guarded. I tried to shake it off, to chalk it up to paranoia. He was probably just another guest, intrigued by the sound of a foreign language. I forced myself to walk back to Nico, a plastic smile plastered on my face. As I resumed my duties, my eyes kept scanning, my reporter's instincts on high alert. My gaze caught on the massive LED screen behind the main stage, where a loop of sponsor logos played, and there it was, glowing in a sleek, minimalist font. Heliotrope Labs. My breath hitched. Heliotrope, the digital supply chain startup I'd been digging into for weeks, the one I suspected was using commodity tokens and a dizzyingly complex blockchain system as a high-tech way to wash money for some very unsavory characters. Seeing their name here, sponsoring a legitimate arts foundation, felt like finding a cockroach in a bowl of caviar. It meant their roots went deeper and were more entwined with the legitimate world than I had feared. Just as that realization settled, a hand touched my elbow. It was Marcus, an art broker with a reputation for being equal parts charming and predatory. "Aria, my dear," he whispered, his voice a conspiratorial hiss. A quick word. He steered me toward an alcove. Some associates of mine just arrived, from the old country. Their English is non-existent. They're interested in a private acquisition. Off the books. I need you. Just for an hour. The fee would be substantial. He named a number that made my head spin. It was more than enough to cover my cousin's bail and my rent for the next 3 months. It was also, without a doubt, a job that would drag me into a world I had spent my life trying to avoid. I hesitated, the weight of my aunt's frantic call pressing down on one side of the scale, and a lifetime of caution on the other. Before I could answer Marcus, a presence eclipsed him. The man from the balcony was suddenly there. Up close, he was even more imposing. He wore a custom suit the color of a midnight sky, tailored so perfectly it seemed fused to his frame. His face was all sharp angles and stark planes. Handsome in a way that had nothing to do with softness and everything to do with power. His eyes, now that they were only a few feet away, were a startlingly clear shade of gray, like a winter storm over the lake. "Signorina Quintana," he said. His voice was a low baritone, smooth but with an edge of gravel, like whiskey poured over stones. He hadn't asked for my name. He already knew it. He completely ignored Marcus, his focus entirely on me. And then he spoke in Italian, a pure, flawless Tuscan dialect that was the gold standard of the language. "La sua pronuncia è impeccabile," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. "Your pronunciation is impeccable. Rara da trovare qui a Chicago." A rare thing to find here in Chicago. It wasn't a compliment, it was a test. He was probing, analyzing my vocal fingerprint. I felt my spine stiffen. I replied in the same formal Italian, keeping my tone neutral, professional. "Grazie, signore. Sono una professionista." "Thank you, sir. I am a professional." "Lo vedo," he replied, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "I see that." At that exact moment, the massive LED screen behind him flickered violently. The sponsor loop vanished, replaced for a split second by a complex QR code under the words "Collezione privata." It was there and gone in a flash, so quickly that the swirl of conversation in the room barely faltered, a technical glitch to everyone else, but I saw it. And I saw the flicker of recognition in his storm gray eyes. He had not only seen it, he had expected it. My phone vibrated again, this time with a text message. Not from my aunt. The number was blocked. The message contained only a few words. "Don't leave. If you do, the Vedetta League's people will think you're the bait." A chill, colder than the autumn rain, snaked down my spine. The Vedetta League. The name was a whisper in the circles I sometimes brushed against for my articles, a rival syndicate to more established outfits, known for being ruthless and unpredictable. Bait for what? The evening began to bleed out. Guests started collecting their coats, the air thinning as the crowd dispersed. I was trying to look for a clear path to the exit, my mind racing, the anonymous text burning a hole in my consciousness. I saw the man, Lucian. I'd heard someone call him standing near the main doors. He was speaking quietly to one of his security detail, a broad-shouldered man with a scar bisecting his eyebrow. Lucian wasn't looking at me, but I felt like I was in his peripheral vision, a piece on a board he was watching. He inclined his head ever so slightly and murmured a single phrase, too low for anyone else to hear. But his lips were clear. "Don't let her leave." The words weren't a suggestion. They were a command. They slid into the air and seemed to solidify, a cage closing around me. The guard's eyes flicked to me for a nanosecond before he touched his earpiece. It was a death sentence delivered with the quiet elegance of a chess move. I made my move for the exit anyway, a hollow sort of panic propelling me forward, but as I got closer, I saw the entrance was a chaotic bottleneck. The downpour had intensified, and a swarm of paparazzi, probably tipped off about some celebrity guest, had mobbed the doors, their flashes strobing like lightning. It was impassable. "Miss Quintana," a different man, this one in a simple but well-cut suit, appeared at my side. His voice was polite, his smile disarming, but his eyes were hard. "It's quite a scene out there. For your safety, we have a room prepared for you in the back while this clears." It was a gentle invitation spoken with the force of a command. My choices had evaporated. I allowed myself to be guided away from the noise, through a service corridor, and into a quiet, minimalist green room. The door clicked shut behind me, the sound echoing with finality. The room was furnished with a leather sofa, a glass table, and 2 chairs. On the table was a bottle of still water and a single, sleek black folder. The man who had escorted me in stood by the door, a silent, immovable guard. The air was still. The night had tightened its grip. After what felt like an eternity, the door opened and Lucian Vassallo entered. He moved with a predatory grace, his presence consuming the small space. He sat in the chair opposite the sofa, gesturing for me to sit. I remained standing. "A freelance interpreter and a data journalist," he began, his voice calm, conversational. "An interesting combination. You look for patterns in chaos." He opened the folder on the table. "I have a job for you, a 48-hour contract, discreet interpretation for a maritime negotiation at North Point Harbor Services." North Point, where's he? A private port with a notorious lack of oversight. My mind reeled. This was connected. Heliotrope, the QR code, the Vedetta League. It was all one tangled, dangerous web, and I was caught in the center. "I'm not for hire," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He ignored me, sliding a document from the folder across the table. It wasn't a contract. It was a photograph, a faded, grainy image from years ago, a man in a port worker's uniform, leaning against a shipping container, smiling a weary but genuine smile. His face was younger, less worn, but I knew it as well as my own. It was my father. My father, who had worked at the docks his whole life. My father, who had been set up, wrongly convicted for a crime he didn't commit, and had died in prison carrying the shame of another man's sins. I stared at the photograph, the air leaving my lungs in a painful rush. The question burned through my shock. Hot and raw, tasting of blood and old grief. I looked up from the image of my dead father and into the cold, calculating eyes of the man who had put it there. "What do you know about my past?" The silence in the room stretched, thin and sharp as a razor's edge. My father's smiling face on that photograph was a ghost, a memory Lucian Vassallo was holding hostage. I finally tore my eyes away from it and met his gaze. "I have conditions," I said, my voice low but firm. "I translate. That's it. Words from one language to another. I'm not a party to anything illicit." A faint, humorless smile touched his lips. It didn't reach his eyes. "Signorina Quintana, I am paying for your accuracy, not your absolution. Your conscience is your own." He didn't have to say anything more. The message was clear. He owned this moment, and by extension, he owned my choices. He knew about my father. That meant he knew about the Interstate Financial Crimes Directorate, the federal agency that had built the case against him, the IFCD, a name I'd spent years whispering like a curse. I was convinced they had buried the exculpatory evidence, the shipping manifest that proved my father had rerouted a container to avoid a chemical spill, an act they twisted into a conspiracy. To them, a dead-end case was better than an unsolved one, and a dock worker was an easy sacrifice. The ride from the warehouse felt like a descent into another city that exists just beneath the surface of Chicago. We were in one of the Vassallo Trust's armored SUVs, a silent, hulking machine that glided through the rain-slicked streets. We bypassed the glittering upper levels of the city and dove into the labyrinth of Lower Wacker Drive. Down here, the world was a concrete canyon of orange sodium lights, steam hissing from grates, and the lonely echo of our tires on the wet pavement. It was a place for secrets. His operation wasn't what I expected. The data center was housed in an anonymous-looking building in the Kinsey Industrial Corridor, a place you'd drive by 1,000 times and never notice. Inside, there was no sign of the brutish violence I associated with men like him. There was only quiet, cold efficiency. The floors were polished concrete, the lighting was recessed, and the air smelled of ozone and powerful cooling systems. Men and women in simple, dark uniforms moved with a silent, disciplined purpose. No one looked at me. No one looked at him. They simply did their jobs. The man with the scar over his eyebrow met us at the entrance to a secure, glass-walled room. He was built like a refrigerator, but he moved with a fluid economy that spoke of extensive training. Lucian introduced him with a simple nod. "This is Cass Rourke. He runs my security." Rourke's eyes were a flat, unemotional gray. "Miss Quintana," he said, his voice a low rumble. "A few rules. You'll leave your personal phone and any other electronics with me. While you are working, all your translations will be recorded on this." He held up a small, matte black device, no bigger than a pack of cards. It's a mnemonic recorder. It encrypts the conversation streams in real time. Only Mr. Vassallo has the decryption key. It ensures perfect recall and total discretion. It was a cage for my words. Every syllable I uttered in his service would be captured, owned. I handed over my clutch, feeling a piece of my independence being surrendered with it. Inside the glass room, a large touchscreen monitor dominated one wall, displaying a complex maritime chart of the Great Lakes. Cass tapped the screen, and a single shipping route glowed blue. A container of specialized medical equipment originating from Genoa, he explained, his tone all business. Its journey is being tracked by a proprietary NFT issued by Heliotrope Labs. My eyes narrowed. I stepped closer to the screen, my reporter's brain kicking into gear. I saw the data points, the projected arrival times, the algorithmic adjustments for weather and lake traffic, and I saw the flaw immediately. "The arrival algorithm is being manipulated," I said, thinking aloud. "It's programmed to create artificial delays at specific coordinates, but it flags them as weather events. It's a digital ghost. It allows the container to disappear from the grid for hours at a time without raising alarms." Lucian, who had been watching me from the corner of the room, stepped forward. "And what would be the purpose of that, Signorina Quintana?" "Time," I answered, not looking at him, my focus locked on the screen. "Time to offload the real cargo and load something else. Time to make a swap in the middle of the lake where there are no eyes." He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, closer. "If I were to find the original IFCD file on your father's case, the complete, unredacted file, would you give me your best translation over the next 48 hours? The question landed like a physical blow. It was the one thing in the world I wanted most, the proof, the truth that had been stolen from my family. I finally turned to face him, the chart's blue light reflecting in my eyes. "Yes," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't hide, "on one condition, that my words don't get anyone innocent hurt." A few hours later, we were on a different kind of rooftop, not a loud, crowded party, but the private terrace of a penthouse restaurant in a skyscraper overlooking the main branch of the Chicago River. The rain had softened to a drizzle, and the city lights bled across the dark, churning water below. We were the only ones there. a table set for two under a heated canopy. A late dinner had been served, untouched. Lucian swirled the dark red wine in his glass. "I grew up in South Philly," he said, the sudden personal disclosure startling me. "Not the nice part. You learn a different kind of code there. The first rule is that you don't bring the fight to people who aren't in the game. You don't spill blood on civilian streets. It's bad for business. It's unethical." The way he said unethical was chilling. For him, morality wasn't a matter of right and wrong, but of clean and messy. He was offering me a glimpse into his world, a justification I hadn't asked for, a reassurance that I was, for now, considered a civilian. As we were leaving, standing in the silent, marble-floored elevator lobby, my temporary, encrypted work phone provided by Cass buzzed with a message. I glanced down. It was a string of random characters, but I recognized the encryption protocol. It was from Maya Cienfuegos, the brilliant, paranoid gray hat hacker who was my secret weapon on most of my data stories. I quickly decoded it in my head. Aurora wasn't just a party. Heliotrope used the sponsor loop to broadcast a hot wallet address via steganography. The QR code was the key. They moved millions. My blood ran cold. I looked up at Lucian, who was watching me with that unnerving, patient intensity. The pieces were slotting together. The bait from the anonymous text, the rival league. I made a decision. I couldn't just be his tool. I had to be a player. "The Vendetta League knows about the container," I said, my voice flat. "They have a source inside your operation, or inside Heliotrope's. Enzo Malric is making a play for it." Lucian didn't even blink. There was no surprise, no denial, just a quiet, assessing stillness. "I know," he said simply. "That's why you're here. My associates from Genoa. They speak a very specific dialect. They choose their words with care. They will say things in front of me, believing I only understand the business at hand." He took a step closer, his presence seeming to lower the temperature in the lobby. "I don't need you to translate what they say. I need you to translate what they mean. I need you to hear the threats they hide in proverbs, the coordinates they bury in small talk. I need your ears, Aria, not just your voice." A gust of wind rattled the plate glass windows of the lobby, a low moan from the city's steel heart. I could see the lights of the Kinsey Street Bridge reflected in his storm-gray eyes. This was the real job. I was to be his listening post, his cultural interpreter, his weapon. Just then, an internal line on his own phone buzzed, a discreet, insistent chirp. He answered. His side of the conversation clipped and sparse. Which sector? And understood. He hung up and looked at me, a new, sharper edge to his gaze. The ghost just became real. The container has vanished from the lake's tracking grid, 2 hours ahead of schedule. He made his decision in the space of a single heartbeat. There was no hesitation, no committee meeting, just the absolute certainty of a man who commanded his world. "Cass is bringing the car around. We're going to the marina. My patrol boat, the Argent One, leaves at dawn. You'll be on it." When I finally got back to my apartment building in Pilsen, it was nearly 3 a.m. The rain had stopped, leaving the air smelling of wet asphalt and clean earth. As I walked up the steps to my second-floor unit, my gaze fell on my front door. My neighbor's 7-year-old son. Leo had been there earlier, leaving one of his chalk drawings on the wood. It was a wobbly, smiling sun, its rays shooting out in uneven lines. I stood there for a long time, just looking at that simple, innocent drawing. It was a relic from a world that, just 12 hours ago, had been my own. A world of rent payments, tight deadlines, and worrying about my cousin. A world where the biggest danger was a missed byline. That world felt 1,000,000 miles away now. The smiling chalk sun was a symbol of a life so fragile, so normal, that it suddenly seemed like a dream. I reached out and traced one of the chalky rays with my finger, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep and cold in my bones, that the door in front of me no longer led back to the life I once knew. It had already slipped right through my fingers. The dawn broke over Lake Michigan not with a bang, but with a slow, silent bleed of bruised purple and gray across the horizon. The water was a sheet of dark, polished glass, so still it felt like we were sliding across a solid surface. The Argent One, Lucian's private patrol boat, was no pleasure yacht. It was a blade of a vessel, all sharp lines and matte gray paint designed for speed and silence. It cut through the water with a low, hungry hum, the only sound in the vast sleeping world. I stood in the enclosed bridge, a mug of black coffee warming my hands. I hadn't slept. Adrenaline and the ghosts of the past night had kept me wide awake. Lucian stood near the helm, a still, dark figure against the growing light, speaking quietly with Cass. He hadn't spoken to me since we'd boarded, but I felt his awareness of me, a constant, low-level pressure. Then, the job began. A satellite phone chirped, and Cass handed it to me. On the screen, a secure connection to Genoa was active. I put the earpiece in, the mnemonic recorder already active and clipped to my belt. "Pronto," I said, my voice crisp, professional. The voice on the other end was gravelly, an older man speaking the clipped dialect of a Genoese shipping broker. He was ostensibly negotiating overtime pay with a union representative here in Chicago. It was a masterful piece of theater. They spoke of pay rates and shift differentials, but the real conversation was happening in the spaces between the words, in the proverbs they used. "The old wolf loses his fur, but not his vice," the broker said in Italian, a common saying, but in the context of their business, it was a signal. The Old Wolf was a specific cargo ship that had changed its registration name. The man in Chicago replied, "Even the fish in the barrel wants a say." Another idiom. It wasn't about the fish, il baril. The barrel was slang for a specific shipping channel near the Indiana border. He was confirming the location. For 20 minutes, I was a conduit, my mind a decoder ring. I translated their banal cover story into English for Lucian, while simultaneously flagging the hidden meanings in my notes. They weren't just talking. They were painting a map. A phrase about a bride in a red dress wasn't a wedding anecdote. It was a reference to a red-hulled container barge. They were giving Lucian the real coordinates for the handoff, a location miles away from the ghost signal on the official grid. When the call ended, I pulled the earpiece out. "They're not at the coordinates from the algorithm," I said, turning to Lucian. "They're further south, near the Calumet Harbor breakwater. The swap is happening now." Lucian simply nodded, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Cass." The engines of the Argent One deepened their hum, and the boat surged forward, lifting onto a plane and slicing through the water. A thick bank of morning fog, a classic feature of the lake in autumn, rolled in, swallowing us in a world of white. We were moving blind, guided only by instruments and the coordinates I had plucked from a conversation of lies. The radar screen was a hypnotic green sweep. Then a blip appeared, two, in fact, one large, one small, nestled together. "Got them," Cass said from the helm. "The smaller signature is a pleasure yacht, the Pleiade, registered out of Miami, clean on paper." "It's never clean on paper," Lucian murmured, more to himself than to me. Cass turned to me then, his expression unreadable. He pressed a small, wireless earpiece into my hand. "Put this in. It's a direct line to me and Mr. Vassallo. When we make contact, things might get active. If I move, you don't ask questions. You go straight to the secure room below deck. You take the recorder with you and you lock the door. Understood." I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. Understood. He was handing me the evidence, making me the custodian of the truth. It was a position of trust, but it felt more like a target painted on my back. The fog began to thin as the sun burned through it, and we saw them. The Pleiade was a gleaming white vessel, 3 decks of obnoxious luxury, looking completely out of place in the industrial gray waters of the harbor approach. Tethered to its side was a single, rust-streaked shipping container on a small barge, a grubby guest at a pristine party. A crane was actively transferring cargo. We approached slowly, our gray, angular boat a shark circling a swan. Men on the deck of the Pleiades stopped their work, their bodies tensing as they saw us. A young man in an expensive suit, his hair perfectly coiffed despite the lake spray, stepped forward to the railing. He was clearly in charge. "This is a private vessel," he yelled across the water, his voice thin in the open air. "You are violating our space." Lucian picked up a handheld radio. "We're here to talk to Enzo Malric," he said, his voice calm and amplified, booming across the water. A speaker on the yacht crackled to life. It was a different voice, older, rougher. "Malric, Vassallo, you have no business here." "Your business is my business when you're poaching on my lake," Lucian replied smoothly. "Send your boy over. Let's talk." A tender was lowered from the yacht, and the young man in the suit motored over, climbing aboard our vessel with a swagger that didn't quite mask his nervousness. He introduced himself as Luca Rinaldi. His eyes swept over me, lingering for a moment with dismissive appraisal before focusing entirely on Lucian. "Mister, Malric has nothing to discuss," Rinaldi began, launching into a prepared speech. Lucian let him talk, his face impassive. I stood a few feet behind him, silent, my role undefined. Rinaldi kept glancing at me, an annoyance. He switched to Italian, assuming I was the only one who would understand, a move meant to exclude Lucian. "Tell your boss this is a simple misunderstanding," he said to me, his tone condescending. "We are enjoying a morning cruise. This container is full of antique furniture." He gestured dismissively. "He's wasting his time. And yours. He shouldn't have brought such a pretty decoration along just because she knows a few words of Italian. We have plenty of those back at the warehouse in Lake Calumet." My heart stopped. There it was. A stupid, arrogant slip from a boy trying to play a man's game. He had just confirmed their land-based hub. I kept my face a perfect professional mask, but I slowly, deliberately, lifted my hand and let my fingers brush against the simple silver chain of the necklace I wore. It was the signal we had agreed upon in a brief, whispered conversation before boarding. "Listen closely. This is important." Lucian's eyes didn't move, but I saw a subtle shift in his posture. He had seen it. The game had just changed. He cut Rinaldi off, speaking in cold, clear English. "Luca," he said, the informal use of his first name a deliberate power play. "Tell Enzo the offer is this: he walks away from the container, and in return, I will give him the decryption key for the Heliotrope Lab's hot wallet ledger. He can see for himself who's been skimming from his profits." Rinaldi's jaw went slack, the color drained from his face. The idea that Lucian not only knew about Heliotrope's dirty dealings, but had access to their internal financial records, was a tactical nuke, he stammered, reaching for his own radio. But it was too late. From the fog, another boat appeared, sleek, black and fast, bearing no markings except for a small, stylized G on its hull. Garnet Security. They weren't police. They were private contractors, the kind you hire when you need a problem solved with technical precision and no official report. A series of loud thumps echoed across the water as they launched a volley of flares. They didn't shoot at us, but over us, creating a blinding curtain of magnesium-white light between our boat and the Pleiade. Then came a high-frequency sound that made my teeth ache. Simultaneously, the water around the yacht began to churn violently as if from multiple torpedoes. It was a phantom attack, a sophisticated illusion of nets and acoustics designed to induce maximum panic without firing a single real shot. "Aria, now!" Cass's voice was a sharp command in my ear. He didn't have to tell me twice. He grabbed my arm, not roughly but with an undeniable force, and propelled me toward the hatch leading below deck. He shoved me through the door to the secure room, a small, steel-walled compartment, and slammed it shut behind me. The heavy lock clicked into place. Plunged into the dim, sound-dampened room, I pressed my hands against the cool, reinforced glass of the porthole. I could see nothing but distorted shapes and the blinding glare of the flares. The chaos outside was a muffled roar, a symphony of shouts, alarms, and the thrum of powerful engines. But through it all, I could hear one thing clearly: the steady, rhythmic tread of Lucian's footsteps on the deck above me, unhurried, controlled, a human metronome in the heart of a storm. Shouts in Italian cut through the din. The accent was different now. Harsher, more guttural, Calabrian. Malric's men were panicking. I fumbled in my pocket for the small notepad and pen Cass had given me and began to write down the fragments I could catch. Keywords: scambio, exchange, il molo, the pier, la casa è vuota, the crate is empty. The whole encounter lasted less than 5 minutes. The noise subsided. The high-frequency sound cut off, and the churning water grew calm. A final, angry shout, and then the sound of the Pleiades engines revving as it sped away. The lock on my door clicked open. Lucian stood there, framed in the doorway. His hair was damp with mist, and his dark coat was beaded with moisture. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were alive with a cold, bright fire. "You did well," he said, his voice a low rumble. I stood up, the notepad clutched in my hand, the mnemonic recorder a heavy weight on my belt. The adrenaline was starting to fade, leaving a hollow, trembling space behind. We stood in the silence of the aftermath, the only sound the gentle rocking of the boat. I looked at him, at the immense, calculated power he had just unleashed. Are you saving people, or are you just saving profits? The question came out before I could stop it, sharper than I intended. He held my gaze, and for the first time, I thought I saw something flicker behind the storm-gray wall of his eyes, something complex and unguarded. "Both," he answered, his voice quiet but absolute. "But the people come first." That night, the city felt different. Lucian had taken me to the Vireo, a boutique hotel in the Loop whose rooftop bar was an oasis of warm light and dark wood suspended over the city's electric grid. Below us, the L trains slid through the canyons of steel and glass, their lit windows like stitches holding the fabric of the night together. The earlier rain had passed, leaving the air clean and cool, carrying the scent of wet stone and the faint, sweet smell of cedar from the outdoor heaters. We weren't there for the view or the drinks. We were there to work. "We need a script," he said, his voice a low counterpoint to the distant rumble of the train. "A reason for you to be with me at North Point tomorrow. Something they'll believe if they're listening in." So we began to build a lie. We became two different people, crafting a dialogue in Italian about a fictional art investment. I was the sharp, skeptical authenticator. He was the wealthy, impatient buyer. We wove a story in a language meant to deceive, but the process of creating it felt more honest than anything I'd experienced in years. "The provenance is weak," I'd say, leaning forward, my tone sharp. "Non mi fido. I don't trust it." "Your job is to verify, not to trust," he would counter, his voice cool, dismissive. "Il prezzo è giusto. The price is right." We practiced the lines, the rhythm, the flow. It became a kind of dance, a verbal choreography where we learned to anticipate each other's moves. His Italian was as flawless as I first thought, but I could hear the subtle inflections of a life lived in America underneath, a history he kept hidden. He learned my cadence, the way I clipped certain phrases when I was feigning frustration, the slight softening of my tone when I was meant to be conceding a point. We were sitting across from each other in a secluded corner, the low table between us, the only thing separating our worlds. As I was making a point about a fictitious artist's signature, I gestured with my hand, letting it rest on the table. He was listening, his gaze intense, and as he prepared to deliver his rebuttal, he mirrored my gesture. The tips of his fingers brushed against the back of my hand. It was the briefest of touches, skin against skin, but it sent a jolt through me that silenced the words in my throat. The entire humming universe of the city below seemed to fall away, the noise fading to a dull roar. All I could feel was that point of contact, a spark of warmth that spread up my arm and settled deep in my chest. I felt my pulse, a steady, professional rhythm just moments before, suddenly trip and begin a new, frantic tempo. I didn't pull my hand away. I couldn't. He must have felt it, too. The shift in the air, the sudden, sharp intake of my breath, the script, the fictional argument, it all dissolved. The space between us was now charged with a different kind of tension, something raw and real. His eyes, which had been playing a role, were now fixed on mine. The cool gray depths swirling with an emotion I couldn't name, but I recognized it as something akin to the wildness I felt in my own blood. He slowly, deliberately, turned his hand over and let his fingers lightly trace the line of my knuckles. He didn't speak for a long moment. He just watched me, reading my reaction. Then, his voice was a mere whisper, all pretense gone. "May I?" 2 words, a simple question that held the weight of everything that had happened between us. It wasn't a demand or an assumption. It was a choice he was giving me, when for the past day, I'd had none. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild bird in a cage. I could have said no. I could have pulled back, retreated into the safety of our professional arrangement, but I didn't want it. I gave him my answer without a word. I leaned forward, closing the last few inches between us, and slowly, deliberately, I lifted my free hand and laid my palm flat against the collar of his suit jacket, my fingers curling slightly into the expensive fabric. It was a clear signal, my consent, my choice. That was all the answer he needed. He leaned in, and his lips met mine. The first kiss was nothing like the violence and chaos of the morning. It was deep and slow, a question and an answer all at once. It was a discovery. His lips were firm, yet soft, tasting faintly of wine and the cool night air. My senses, already on high alert, zeroed in on him, the subtle scent of sandalwood and wool, the soft scratch of his evening stubble against my skin, the solid strength of him as he moved closer. I felt my breath mingle with his, a shared warmth in the chilly air. My back came to rest against the smooth, warm wood of the railing that enclosed our alcove, the city lights a blurred kaleidoscope behind him. The distant, rhythmic clatter of the train became the soundtrack to the moment. His hand came up, not to my face, but to my shoulder, which my dress left bare. His touch was warm, his fingers gently tracing the curve where my neck met my shoulder blade. It wasn't a possessive grip, it was an exploration. His thumb stroked my skin, sending shivers down my spine. The intensity of it was overwhelming, a tidal wave of sensation I hadn't realized I'd been starving for. It was too much, too fast. I needed a breath. I needed to remember who I was in this moment without thinking. My hand, still resting on his chest, tightened, my fingers squeezing his wrist. He stopped immediately. He didn't pull away, but the pressure of his lips lessened, and his hand on my shoulder stilled. He drew back just enough to look at me, his eyes searching mine in the dim light. No words were needed. He understood. It was a pause, a conscious check-in, a silent negotiation written in the language of touch. He had respected my boundary without me having to say a word. "I need the truth, Lucien," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "And a choice, always a choice." "You will have both," he murmured, his thumb resuming its slow, gentle movement on my shoulder. No cages, no lies. He straightened up, shrugging out of his suit jacket. The air was cool on my bare arms, but only for a moment. He draped the jacket over my shoulders. It was heavy, warm from his body, and enveloped me in his scent. It felt like a shield. He didn't try to kiss me again. Instead, his other hand came up to the back of my neck, his fingers gently threading into the hair at my nape, cradling my head. He leaned his forehead against mine, his eyes closing for a second. "Sei al sicuro con me?" he breathed, the Italian words a heavy, solemn promise against my skin. "You are safe with me." The tension didn't disappear, but it changed. It was no longer a dangerous, uncertain thing, but a thrumming, resonant chord between us. He took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine, and led me from the alcove to a small, sheltered area of the terrace under an overhang. The music from the indoor bar was a faint, jazzy whisper out here. He turned to me, pulling me gently closer, and we began to move, a slow, unchoreographed dance. It wasn't a dance for an audience. It was a conversation our bodies were having. His hand rested on the small of my back, a steady, warm pressure through the silk of my dress and the wool of his jacket. My hand rested on his shoulder. We swayed to the phantom music, to the rhythm of our own breathing, which seemed to have fallen into sync. My head found the curve of his neck, and I inhaled his scent, feeling the steady, powerful beat of his heart against my cheek. I felt the hard lines of his body, the coiled strength held in reserve. He was a dangerous man, I knew that. But in this moment, wrapped in his arms, in the warmth of his jacket, I felt an impossible sense of peace. We danced until the music faded, until the rooftop began to empty. He walked me to the door of the suite he had arranged for me at the hotel, a place for me to rest before the early start at the harbor. At the door, the electricity flared between us again. He turned me to face him, his hand still holding mine, the other coming up to cup my jaw. His lips found mine again, a kiss that was deeper this time, more certain. A small laugh escaped me, a sound of surprise and something else, something I couldn't define. The door was open behind me. The room was dark, the only light spilling from the hallway. This was the edge, the threshold. And this is where the story pauses. This is where the camera of my memory pulls back, respectfully. To describe what came next would be to betray it, to turn something private into a performance. Let's just say the night was filled with the sound of the rain starting again, a soft tattoo against the glass, and the steady, unbreakable rhythm of two hearts that had, against all odds, found the same beat. I woke with the morning sun streaming through the vast window, painting a stripe of gold across the white linens. I was alone. For a panicked second, I thought it might have all been a dream, a fantasy spun from adrenaline and fear, but then I smelled it, the lingering scent of sandalwood on the pillow next to me, and his jacket was still there, draped neatly over a chair. On the bedside table, next to a glass of water, was a single, folded piece of the hotel's stationery. His handwriting was stark and angular, just like him. 9 a.m., North Point Harbor. I sat up, pulling the sheet around me, my mind surprisingly clear. A gate had been opened last night. I had walked through it willingly, but I had also been the one to set the rules. Passion, yes. Surrender, no. I was still a player in this game, not a prize. And today, the game was heading to the docks. North Point Harbor was a world of organized chaos, a city of steel containers stacked like colossal Lego bricks under the watchful eyes of skeletal cranes. The air was sharp with the scent of diesel, lake water, and rust. The meeting took place not in a grimy office, but in a sterile, glass-walled conference room overlooking the vast container yard, a space designed to project an image of clean, modern efficiency that felt profoundly false. It was a three-sided affair. On one side sat Lucian and me, representing the Vasello Trust. On another, two slick executives from Heliotrope Labs, their CTO a young, arrogant tech bro named Caden, whose smile never reached his eyes. The third side was occupied by a man introduced as the representative for an independent dockworkers collective, a burly figure whose expensive suit couldn't hide the rough edges of a life spent in less forgiving environments. The script we'd rehearsed on the rooftop was our cover. I was the art specialist, here to vet Lucian's potential investment in Heliotrope's parent company. Caden launched into his presentation, a dazzling display of buzzwords and flashy graphics about their NFT-driven logistics system. He spoke of immutable ledgers, tokenized bills of lading, and frictionless supply chains. He was selling a perfect system, a seamless digital skin stretched over the messy reality of global shipping. The dockworker representative nodded along, his face a mask of bored comprehension. Lucian was silent, watching, letting Caden spin his web. I let him talk for 10 minutes, absorbing the technical jargon, looking for the loose thread. I found it in a slide about transaction finality. When he finished, smiling like a magician who had just pulled off a grand illusion, I leaned forward. I switched to Italian, my tone casual, inquisitive, just as we'd practiced. Un sistema impressionante, Signor Caden, I began, nodding at his screen. An impressive system. Ma sono curiosa, con transazioni così permanenti. Qual è il costo per bruciare un token se un carico viene perso o rifiutato? But I'm curious, with such permanent transactions, what is the cost for burning a token if a shipment is lost or rejected? It was a technical, inside baseball question, a question an art authenticator obsessed with provenance might ask. Caden's smile tightened. He was fluent, but my question forced him off his script. He answered me in Italian, a bit of his swagger returning as he explained the gas fees and the process for voiding a token on the public ledger. But I wasn't finished. Capisco, I said, nodding thoughtfully. Ma questo deve creare un'impronta digitale disordinata. Avete un portafoglio di riserva. Forse, per gestire queste discrepanze internamente prima che vengano registrate pubblicamente. I understand. But that must create a messy digital footprint. Do you have a reserve wallet, perhaps to manage these discrepancies internally before they are publicly recorded? And there it was, the slip. His arrogance wouldn't let him admit to a flaw in his perfect system. Certo, he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. Il nostro portafoglio di riserva gestisce tutte le riconciliazioni. È completamente fuori catena, per efficienza. Of course, our reserve wallet handles all reconciliations. It's completely off-chain, for efficiency. He had admitted it, the existence of a hidden, off-ledger wallet where transactions could be manipulated or erased before ever touching the immutable blockchain. It was the digital equivalent of a secret set of books. I saw a flicker in Lucian's eyes. The hook was set. I gave a satisfied nod, as if my minor technical query had been answered, and the meeting concluded shortly after. In the car, driving away from the harbor, the silence was thick with unspoken energy. The city slid past the tinted windows, a blur of motion. Lucian didn't speak until we were on Lakeshore Drive, the vast, placid blue of the lake on one side, the towering ambition of the city on the other. He reached into the compartment between our seats and pulled out a slim, unmarked file, placing it on my lap. It wasn't a copy. It looked like an original. The paper aged, the staples slightly rusted. This is a draft of the IFCD's final report on your father's case, he said, his voice quiet, from their internal archives. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was filled with dry, bureaucratic language, but I found the page I was looking for the preliminary witness statements, and there it was, a name I recognized as Senior Doc Foreman, a friend of my father's, and his testimony, clearly stating that my father, John Quintana, had diverted the container under his own authority to prevent a hazardous spill, citing a specific regulation. A statement that would have cleared him. A line was drawn through the entire paragraph in red pen, with a handwritten note in the margin. Testimony irrelevant, redundant to primary charge. Omit from final. The air left my lungs. For 7 years, I had believed. Now I knew. It was right here, in black and white and blood-red ink, the proof that they hadn't just made a mistake. They had actively, deliberately buried the truth. I closed the file, my knuckles white. I looked at him, my vision blurring slightly. What do you want in return? His gaze was steady, intense. The truth is a language, aria, just like Italian. The people I'm fighting, they use it to hide, to encode their intentions in layers of plausible deniability. You heard it today. You asked a question that unraveled a lie. I don't need a translator. I need an exegete. I need you to help me read the framework of their deception. On the drive back, I used the encrypted phone to call Maya. I didn't give her names or specifics, just the raw data from the heliotrope transaction logs I had photographed at Lucian's data center and the new concept of an off-chain reserve wallet. We spoke in our own code, a language of data structures and protocol exploits. "They're not just washing it," she said, her voice a rapid-fire burst of text-to-speech from the other end. "They're tagging it. The transactions being reconciled in the reserve wallet have metadata markers. They look random, but they're not." "What kind of markers?" I asked. "Watching the traffic lights change?" "Florals," and she replied. "Every high-value, off-chain transfer is tagged with a flower name. Iris, dahlia, camellia. They're blood tokens. Aria. Each one corresponds to a different category of illicit goods." My mind raced, connecting the dots, the flowers, the container swaps, the ghost on the lake. "Can you trace the wallet's physical access points?" "Already on it," Maya said. "The IP addresses are masked, of course, but the last reconciliation packet, the one tagged Dahlia, pinged from a dedicated fiber optic line. The terminal point is a warehouse in the Lake Calumet Industrial District." When I relayed this to Lucian, he had Cass pull up a satellite view of the address. It was a sprawling, windowless building, and emblazoned on the wall in faded blue paint was a logo, a stylized eagle over a map of the Great Lakes, the Inland Trade Board, a federal-sounding name that was pure fiction, a shell to give their operation a veneer of legitimacy. As Cass was zooming in on the building's access points, he suddenly froze. "We've got a tail," he said, his voice flat. "Drone, high altitude." He pointed to a tiny, almost invisible black dot on one of the car's external camera feeds. My encrypted phone buzzed. It was Maya again. "Radio chatter near you just spiked. Low wattage, UHF. They're talking about La Ragazza." The girl, me. My blood ran cold. The Vedetta League wasn't just watching the deal. They were watching me. They had identified me as the key. "The plan is burned," Lucian said instantly, his voice like flint. "The signing at my office is off." He was already thinking 3 moves ahead. "We need a new location, somewhere secure, private, with no electronic footprint." He looked at me. "The Orpheon Library. The private reading rooms are soundproof. Some are even shielded." As if on cue, a motorcycle courier pulled up alongside our SUV at a red light. Tapping on the window, Cass lowered it an inch, and the courier passed a thick manila envelope through before speeding off. Inside was a single document, a photocopy of a search warrant to be executed by the IFCD on Heliotrope Labs, tonight. The entire board was about to be upended. The feds were moving in. Lucian took the warrant from me, his face grim. "My source says the IFCD is going to make a show of it, but they'll leave the off-chain servers untouched unless someone points them in the right direction." He then reached into his coat and pulled out a single, old-fashioned brass key attached to a simple plastic tag. He pressed it into my hand. My skin tingled where he touched me. "Union Mart Storage on Elston," he said. "Locker 7B. I believe your father left something for you there. He was a meticulous man." The storage facility was a place of echoing silence and the smell of concrete dust. Locker 7B was in a quiet corner of the ground floor. The key turned smoothly in the lock. Inside, there was nothing but a single, shoebox-sized metal container. It wasn't locked. I lifted the lid. My breath caught in my throat. On top of a small stack of papers was a single, faded Polaroid picture. It showed 2 men, much younger, standing on a dock, smiling. One was my father, his arm slung casually over the other's shoulders. The other man was leaner, his face not yet hardened by the power he would one day wield, but the same intense, storm-gray eyes were unmistakable. It was Lucian's father. I turned the photo over. Scrawled on the back in my father's familiar handwriting were 6 words. "Repay the debt with the truth." It wasn't a crime he was involved in. It was a debt of honor to be paid not with money or violence, but with truth. My father hadn't been a criminal. He'd been a man caught between 2 powerful forces, trying to do the right thing. And he had left this for me, a map, a legacy. In that cold, quiet storage locker, the last vestiges of my fear burned away. replaced by something hot and hard and clear as glass. This was no longer just about clearing my father's name. It was about finishing what he started. A burning, righteous anger settled in my gut. I would peel back every layer of this rotten enterprise. I would expose every lie, and I would get to the truth. No matter who it crushed, the city became a blur. News of the IFCD raid on Heliotrope's headquarters broke on a secure alert from Maya, and we were moving before the first news vans had even arrived. But we weren't the only ones. A shadow network was moving in parallel. "Vedetta is on the move," Cass reported from the driver's seat, his eyes scanning a tablet displaying the city's traffic cameras. "They're not waiting for the feds to finish. They're going for the servers." We were a ghost in the machine, a black SUV sliding through the city's arteries. We took the lower streets, avoiding the main thoroughfares. Cass drove with an unnerving calm, weaving through the steel and concrete maze with an instinct that was more animal than human. We hit the Kinsey Street Bascule Bridge just as the bells began to clang, the warning lights flashing a frantic red rhythm against the dark cabin. The bridge began to rise, a giant metal jaw opening to the sky, forcing us to a stop. The flashing red lights pulsed like a nervous heartbeat. In the rearview mirror, I saw it, a black sedan, no plates, sliding to a halt a few car lengths behind us. It had been with us since we left the storage facility. My encrypted phone rang, a jarring digital shriek in the sudden silence. The caller ID was a string of scrambled numbers. I looked at Lucian. He gave a single, sharp nod. I answered. "Aria Quintana." The voice was female, professional and devoid of warmth. "My name is Nora Liddell. I'm with the IFCD." I said nothing. "You're in over your head," she continued, her tone clipped. "Vassallo is not your friend. He's a shark, and you're swimming in his wake. I can offer you a way out. Full immunity. The mnemonic recorder from the boat, and any other recordings you have, hand them over, and you walk away clean. We'll even reopen your father's case officially." A way out, a clean break. The offer was a siren song, promising a return to a life that no longer existed. But I had seen the file. I knew what their official process was worth. "I only trust the data," I said, my voice cold. I ended the call, but I didn't delete the number. A bargaining chip was a bargaining chip. The bridge lowered with a final, shuddering groan, and we were moving again, the black sedan still glued to our tail. Cass made a series of sharp, unpredictable turns, diving into a service alley that smelled of wet garbage and old secrets. We emerged on a different street. The sedan was gone. For now. The Orpheon Library was an island of profound silence in the heart of the city's noise. It was a private institution, a fortress of knowledge built from limestone and dark mahogany. We were admitted through a rear entrance by a silent, elderly curator who seemed to be expecting us. He led us down a spiral staircase, the air growing cooler, the scent of old paper and leather becoming more pronounced. We entered a subterranean reading room, a chamber lined with books from floor to ceiling. The walls were thick brick. The door was a heavy slab of oak, and the table in the center was a single, massive piece of walnut, polished so smooth it felt like cool skin. There were no windows, no electronics, save for a single hardwired monitor on the table. "It's shielded," Lucian said, his voice a low rumble in the tomb-like quiet. "Nothing gets in or out." Cass stood by the door, an immovable statue. Lucian connected a secure hard drive to the monitor. I plugged in the encrypted phone from Maya. A moment later, she was in. Her digital presence appeared on the screen as lines of code, scrolling too fast for a normal person to read. She was a ghost in this machine. Got it. Her text appeared. Caden's off-chain wallet, bypassing their primary security. He was sloppy. A diagram appeared on the screen, a flow chart of digital money. I saw the stream of cryptocurrency being funneled from Heliotrope's main accounts into the reserve wallet. And then I saw the outflow. Millions of dollars in Dahlia tokens, the ones I knew were connected to the illicit cargo, being funneled into a single destination. It wasn't a bank. It was a foundation. the Seaglass Charitable Fund. Seaglass, I breathed. That's Vedetta's front. Enzo Malric's pet project. He uses it to wash his money in plain sight. Lucian nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the screen. And now we have the proof. The heavy oak door creaked open. We all turned. It wasn't the old curator. Enzo Malric stood in the doorway, flanked by two men, including the young, arrogant Luca Rinaldi from the yacht. Malric was older than Lucian, his hair a distinguished silver, his suit impeccably tailored. He smiled, a thin, predatory expression that made the quiet room feel claustrophobic. "Lucian," he said, his voice smooth, almost friendly, "always one step ahead, and you." He turned his gaze to me. "Signorina Quintana, the Rosetta Stone of this little war." He stepped into the room, his men staying at the door. He ignored Lucian, his focus entirely on me. "You have been misled. Vassallo is using your father's memory to manipulate you. I, on the other hand, can give you what you truly want, justice." "I don't need you for justice," I said, my voice steady. "Don't you?" he purred. "The IFCD buried the truth. I can unearth it. Or better yet, I can create a new one, a confession from a dying man, a lost piece of evidence discovered in an old locker. I can give your father's name back to you, pristine and heroic. All I ask for in return is your talent and your loyalty." He was offering me a lie, a beautifully crafted fiction to replace the ugly truth. He wanted to buy me, to own my voice, my mind where I stood up straight, feeling the weight of my father's photograph, the one of him and Lucian's father, in my pocket. I looked Malric in the eye, and I answered him in the purest, most formal Tuscan Italian I could summon. "La verità non è una merce da vendere. The truth is not a commodity to be sold." Malric's smile faltered. Before he could respond, the doorway filled with new figures. A woman in a sharp, practical pantsuit stood at the front, her face a mask of cold determination. It was Nora Liddell. She was flanked by a team of plainclothes agents, their presence radiating a quiet, menacing authority. They didn't draw their weapons. They didn't need to. Their power was in the badges clipped to their belts, in the full force of the federal government they represented. "Well," Nora said, her eyes sweeping the room, taking in the scene with a predatory gleam, "this is efficient, Mr. Malric, Mr. Vassallo, and Miss Quintana, everyone I wanted to see, all in one place." She wanted to be the hero of this story, the one who took down 2 criminal empires in a single night. The room was a powder keg, 3 factions, each with their own agenda, locked in a silent standoff. Lucian made the first move. He walked to the table and placed the small, black mnemonic recorder in the exact center of the polished wood. "This device contains the complete, unedited audio of my negotiations with the Genoese brokers and my encounter with Mr. Rinaldi," he stated, his voice calm and clear. "I request that a representative from the Marble Archives Institute be brought here to act as a neutral third-party witness to its transcription." It was a brilliant move, shifting the confrontation from a backroom showdown to a quasi-legal proceeding. Malric wanted the recorder to destroy it. Nora wanted it as evidence. Lucian was using it as a shield and a sword. It was a triangular game of chess, and the recorder was the queen. But I was the only one in the room who understood all the nuances of the language it held. I knew the difference between a proverb and a death threat, between an idiom and an admission of guilt. I looked at the faces in the room. Malric, arrogant and confident. Nora, hungry and ambitious. Lucian, controlled and calculating. They were all waiting for the next move, for someone to flinch. They were all playing their game. It was time for me to play mine. I walked to the wall behind the monitor, where a heavy, industrial-grade power conduit fed electricity to the room. With a single, decisive motion, I reached out and pulled the main breaker switch. The room plunged into near darkness. The monitor died. The main lights went out, replaced by the dim, eerie green glow of a single emergency battery pack above the door. A collective gasp went through the room. "The emergency system has a 20-minute battery life," I announced into the sudden, suffocating silence. "That's how long we have to decide how this story ends." The hourglass was turning, and for the first time, my hand was the one that had turned it. The green glow of the emergency light cast long, distorted shadows across the room, turning faces into masks. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The sudden darkness had reset the board. My 20-minute hourglass was running. "The mnemonic recorder," I said into the silence, my voice echoing slightly off the book-lined walls. "Put it on the table. Now." Nora hesitated, her eyes narrowing. Malric smirked, sensing an opportunity, but it was Lucien who moved first. He picked up the small black device and slid it across the smooth walnut surface until it stopped directly in front of me. He trusted me, completely. I connected the recorder to my encrypted phone, the screen providing a small pool of white light. I bypassed the complex encryption with a code Lucien had given me earlier, my fingers flying across the screen. I found the first file, the phone call with the Genoese broker. I hit play, the tinny Italian filling the tense silence. I began to translate, but not literally. I translated the soul of the conversation. "The old wolf loses his fur, but not his vice," I began, my eyes scanning the faces in the room. "He isn't talking about an animal. The old wolf is the Stella Nera, a cargo freighter that was re-registered under a Panamanian flag last month to avoid sanctions. The vice is its illegal refrigeration system, the only one capable of transporting a specific volatile chemical precursor." I let that hang in the air for a moment before continuing. "Even the fish in the barrel wants a say. Il baril is dockworkers' slang for Channel 6 at the Port of Indiana. That wasn't a negotiation for overtime. It was the confirmation of the drop point." I moved through the recording, deconstructing their coded language piece by piece. I turned folksy proverbs into GPS coordinates, casual mentions of family members into code names for specific payloads, and complaints about the weather into a timeline for the transfer. It was no longer a conversation, it was a blueprint for a crime. Then I played the part that mattered most, a snippet of small talk near the end of the call, where the broker mentioned making a donation to a charity one of his political friends supported. He mentioned sending a gift to a friend who appreciates the sea. The gift was a wire transfer. The friend is IFCD Commissioner Thompson, and the charity. I looked directly at Nora Liddell. Was the Sea Glass Fund. The color drained from Nora's face. Her professional mask cracked, revealing the shocked, angry woman beneath. She had been hunting criminals, only to find the rot was inside her own house. The commissioner was her boss, her mentor. Lucien never took his eyes off me. He was watching me not as a tool, but as a compass. His expression one of absolute, unwavering focus. I turned my phone screen toward a glass-fronted bookshelf, the light projecting Maya's data flow chart onto the surface. The iris tokens correspond to the chemical precursors, I said. I picked up a dry erase marker from a small tray on the table, my hand steady. While the audio played, I began to draw on the glass, my movements precise. I traced the route of the Stella Nera from the Mediterranean, connected it to the drop point in Channel 6, and then drew a line inland, directly to the Lake Calumet warehouse. I circled the warehouse and then drew an arrow pointing directly to the Sea Glass Fund. It was a perfect, damning circle. "This is a lie," Malric snarled, his composure finally breaking. He pulled out his own phone. "You want to talk about the truth? Let's see the truth about Lucien Vassallo." He tapped his screen, and a video filled the small space with light and sound. It was grainy, covert footage of Lucien meeting with a known arms dealer in Naples. The audio, a heated conversation in Italian about a shipment of weapons. It was designed to paint Lucien as a monster, a man far more dangerous than himself. I didn't even need to see the whole thing. I listened for 3 seconds, my ear, trained by years of translation work, picking up the flaws. "It's a fake," I said calmly, cutting through the video's audio. Malric stared at me, dumbfounded. The ambient sound is wrong, the dialect is Neapolitan, but the speaker in the video is using a Sicilian grammatical structure for his verbs. And there's a low-frequency hum under the entire audio track, the kind you get from a bad ground loop on a cheap microphone. The audio was dubbed poorly. In that instant of shocked silence, Cass moved. He wasn't just a guard, he was a force of nature. He shoved a towering bookshelf, which swung inward with a low groan, revealing a dark, narrow opening in the brick wall, an escape. "Go," was all he said. Lucian grabbed my hand, his grip firm, and pulled me toward the opening. There was no time to think. One moment I was in a library filled with enemies, the next I was plunging into cool darkness. We ran, our footsteps echoing in the tight, curved brick tunnel. It smelled of damp earth and a century of secrets. We ran in perfect sync, his pace matching mine, our joined hands a single point of connection in the disorienting dark. We emerged into the cavernous silence of an underground parking garage. The air was cold, smelling of concrete and gasoline. Yellow sodium lights cast long, sickly shadows. Lucian pulled me toward a dark, anonymous sedan parked in a reserved spot. "Get in," he commanded, his voice tight. "Cass will meet us at a secure location. You'll be safe." He was trying to protect me, to put me in a box and hide me away until the danger passed. But the woman who had entered this library wasn't the same one who was leaving it. I pulled my hand free, and he stopped, turning to face me. "No," I said, my voice ringing with a certainty that surprised even me. I stepped closer to him, into his personal space, and placed my hand flat on his chest. I could feel the frantic, powerful beat of his heart under my palm. Running isn't the solution. Hiding isn't the answer. We have to face it. We have to end it. He stared down at me, his gray eyes searching my face in the dim, yellow light. The world seemed to fall away, leaving just the two of us in that cold, silent space. He saw the resolve in my eyes, the fire that had been ignited. He saw that I was no longer a victim in his story, but a co-author of our own. His expression softened, the hard, protective mask he wore for the world dissolved, revealing the man underneath. He brought his hands up to cup my face, his callous thumbs stroking my cheeks. We leaned into each other, and he kissed me. It wasn't like the rooftop kiss, which had been a discovery. This was a confirmation. It was a slow, deep kiss that spoke of shared burdens and a common path, a silent promise made in the shadows. It was a commitment forged in fire. When we broke apart, I kept my hand on his chest, looking directly into his eyes. "Take me to your weakest point," I said, my voice barely a whisper, yet it carried the weight of an oath. "Take me to the place you protect the most. I'll make it strong." For a moment, I saw a flash of vulnerability in his eyes, a flicker of shock that I would ask such a thing, that I would want to walk toward his greatest risk instead of away from it. Then, he nodded. A single, sharp movement. It was a leap of faith, a level of trust so profound it was dangerous for a man like him. The place was called Halberd Steel, a rusted skeleton of a mill on the city's industrial south side, abandoned for decades. It was a cathedral of decay, its vast, empty spaces haunted by the ghosts of forgotten industry. This was his weakness, not a fortress or a vault, but a memory. He led me to a small brick foreman's office inside the main foundry floor. Inside, shielded from the elements, were rows of old, gray metal filing cabinets. No computers, no digital files, just paper. "My father believed some things should never be digitized," he said, his voice low. He called it a ledger of honor. Every deal, every promise, every debt. He opened a drawer, the metal groaning in protest, and pulled out a thick, leather-bound ledger. He placed it on a dusty desk. I opened it. The pages were filled with elegant, old-world cursive, and then I saw it. A page dated 7 years ago. At the bottom, authorizing the entry, was a signature. John Quintana. My father's signature. I ran my trembling fingers over the dried ink, but it wasn't what I expected. The entry wasn't for an illicit shipment or a smuggled container. The heading at the top of the page read, Route Termination Hazardous Materials Abatement, Civilian Safety Protocol. The entry detailed the closing of a specific shipping lane and the rerouting of 3 containers carrying mislabeled toxic industrial waste. My father hadn't been covering up a crime. He had been stopping one. He had signed his name to an action that saved lives, an action that the IFCD had twisted into his downfall. It was all there, the proof, the truth. A single choked sob escaped my lips. Tears I didn't know I'd been holding back for 7 years began to fall, warm and silent on my cheeks. I stared at his signature, a testament to the good man he had been, a man I had never stopped believing in. Lucian didn't speak. He simply came to stand behind me, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. He didn't offer empty words of comfort. He just stood there, a solid, silent presence, letting me have the moment, letting me grieve for the years of injustice and reclaim the memory of my father. His touch was an anchor, his silence a language of its own. Finally, I took a deep, shuddering breath and wiped the tears from my face with the back of my hand. I looked up at him, my eyes clear now, burning with a new, unshakable resolve. Tonight, I said, my voice raw but strong, we end this. My plan was audacious, bordering on insane. We weren't going to leak the truth to a reporter or hand it over to a compromised federal agency. We were going to give it directly to the city. The Skyline Audio Networks, I explained. The leather-bound ledger open on the dusty desk in front of us. It's a public art installation, a network of high-fidelity speakers disguised on rooftops and lampposts across the loop. They play ambient music, soundscapes. Maya says she can get us a clean access port. We're going to broadcast everything. The ledger, the mnemonic recorder, live. It was a declaration of open war, fought with information as the weapon. Lucian listened, his expression unreadable, but I saw a new light in his eyes. He wasn't just seeing a translator anymore. He was seeing a strategist. The next hour was a blur of calculated chaos, while Maya worked her digital magic, opening a back door into the Skyline's central control system. Cass assembled what he called a phantom squad, a handful of his most trusted men in a series of nondescript cars with cloned license plates, tasked with creating electronic noise and false trails across the city grid to draw attention away from our real objective. As we prepared to move, my encrypted phone buzzed. It was Nora Liddell. Her text was an ultimatum, stripped of all pretense. The recorder, 1 hour, or I issue a warrant for you and Vassallo as accessories. This was my chance. I typed back, my fingers steady. You get your dirty commissioner. The audio proves he was on Seaglass's payroll. In return, I get a full public exoneration for John Quintana, signed, sealed, and delivered before the sun comes up. Those are the terms. A single word came back almost instantly. Deal. I knew she was lying. She would never make a deal that clean. She would get her warrant, tip off Malric to our location, and let him try to take the evidence. Then her team would swoop in, arrest him, seize the recorder, and she would be the hero who took down 2 syndicates at once. I was counting on her treachery. I sent a quick, coded message to Maya, embed a sub-audible tone in the broadcast, 40 kilohertz. If I say the Italian phrase, Il gioco è fatto, cut the tone. It's the signal. It was a tripwire, a signal for a different kind of police force, one Nora didn't control. The Skyline Control Center was located at the top of a slender, overlooked office building, a glass and steel nerve center with a panoramic view of the city we were about to speak to. As we set up, Lucian turned to me. He placed the heavy ledger and the small mnemonic recorder on the console in front of me. "This is your flag to fly," he said, his voice a low rumble of absolute trust. He didn't hover, he didn't command. He stepped back, moving to the periphery of the room with Cass, his focus shifting to the doors, the windows, the perimeter. He was the shield. I was the sword. I took a deep breath, queued up the audio files, and opened the microphone channel. "Maya, are we live?" "Broadcasting citywide." Her text appeared on my screen. "The whole world is listening." I began. My voice, broadcast from 100 hidden speakers, fell over the city like a sudden rain. I started in Italian, a deliberate choice, reading a key passage from the Genoese broker's call. The melodic, coded words filled the night air, a beautiful language used to plan ugly things. Then I switched to English. For those of you who don't speak the language of secrets, let me translate. Marine say, I said, my voice clear and unwavering. I began to unravel the whole conspiracy, live for anyone to hear. I explained the ghost ship on the lake, the container swap, the puppet company Heliotrope Labs. I told them about the flower tokens, Iris for chemicals, Camellia for weapons, and Dahlia, my voice hardened, for the trafficking of human lives. Below us, the city began to react. I could see it from our perch. The flow of traffic on Michigan Avenue slowed. Pedestrians stopped on sidewalks, their heads tilted up as if searching for the source of the voice from the heavens. The first cell phone cameras began to appear, tiny points of light aimed at the sky, recording. The first attack came sooner than I expected, a heavy thud from the stairwell door. Malrich's team. Cass was already moving, a silent shadow detaching from the wall. He met them in the hallway, and the sounds of a muffled, brutal fight began. He was a wall, holding back the tide. Then, Nora's team stormed in through a different entrance. They were tactical, efficient, spreading out to secure the room. It's over, Quintana, Nora said, her voice tight with triumph. You've all been caught in the act. But her victory was hollow, because as she spoke, I was broadcasting the evidence that implicated her boss. I started reading the names and dates from the Sea Glass donation records, linking them directly to Commissioner Thompson's offshore accounts. Nora froze, her face a mask of disbelief turning to horror. She was caught in her own trap. The evidence she'd come to seize was simultaneously destroying her career and her mentor on a live public broadcast. Hot wallet address 0x74C. I continued, my voice ringing with authority as I read the data from Maya's screen. An anonymous donation of $2.5 million in crypto, made by a shell corporation owned by Enzo Malrich, to the Sea Glass Fund. That donation was made 3 days before the IFCD dropped its investigation into the disappearance of 3 cargo containers from North Point Harbor. I named them all, the shell corps, the bank accounts, the politicians on the take. I laid the entire criminal enterprise bare. On the street below, the small crowd had become a large one. The story was spreading, a wildfire jumping from phone to phone, from screen to screen. On my monitor, Maya sent a new message. Heliotrope's main server just went offline. They're trying to erase the data. Too late. I have it all. A moment later, Sea Glass website is down. Nora stood paralyzed, the broadcast holding her hostage. Then, a call came through on her radio, a frantic voice from her headquarters. She had to act. I watched as the ambition in her eyes died, replaced by a grim resignation. She turned to one of her agents and gave a quiet, choked order. She was being forced, in real time, to issue the warrant for her own commissioner. That's when Malrich broke through. He burst into the room, his face contorted in a mask of fury, a weapon in his hand. Cass was right behind him, his shoulder bleeding through his jacket, but still moving. Malrich raised his weapon, aiming not at Lucian, but at me, at the source. Everything happened in a blur of motion. Lucian moved faster than I thought possible. A predator uncoiled. He didn't go for the weapon, he went for the man. He disarmed Malrich in 2 swift, brutal moves, a symphony of leverage and force. But Malrich was desperate. He lunged with a concealed knife, a sliver of silver that raked across Lucian's forearm. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I stepped forward, directly into the space between them. I stood in front of Lucian, facing Malrich, my heart hammering but my voice absolutely calm. I spoke to him in Italian, the words sharp and precise. He shouldn't have brought such a pretty decoration along just because she knows a few words of Italian. I said, quoting his own arrogant words from the deck of the Pleiad, "We have plenty of those back at the warehouse in Lake Calumet." His eyes widened in shock. I had just proven that I hadn't just heard his words, I had owned them. I had used his own arrogance as a weapon, and in that moment, in front of everyone, it exposed him as a fool. His rage faltered, replaced by the cold, humiliating fear of being outplayed. The wail of sirens, different this time, rose from the streets below, the official city police, the Civic Guard North Shore, responding to a dozen emergency calls about a public disturbance and a hostage situation. They flooded the room, their presence overwhelming, their authority absolute. They secured Malric, their movements efficient and impersonal. I turned back to the microphone. The city still listening. The story was told. The truth was out. I took a breath and spoke the final words. Truth doesn't need a gun, I said, my voice echoing across the listening city. It just needs to be unafraid. The quiet of Marrow Heights Private Hospital was a world away from the adrenaline and chaos of the past 48 hours. The air here was sterile, the silence broken only by the soft beep of distant monitors and the squeak of rubber-soled shoes on polished linoleum. It was a place for mending, and we were all in need of it. Cass was in a private room, his shoulder heavily bandaged, but his spirit stubbornly intact. He was already grumbling about the weakness of the hospital's coffee. Lucian was in a small treatment room, a doctor meticulously stitching the gash on his forearm. I sat on a stool beside him, a silent observer. I watched the needle dip and rise, closing the wound, and felt a strange sense of calm. The violence was over. Now the healing could begin. My gaze was steady, my hands resting quietly in my lap. The warrior who had commanded a room full of powerful enemies with nothing but her voice was gone, replaced by a woman watching over a man she cared for. The two were one and the same. The door swished open, and Nora Liddell stood there. She looked exhausted, the ambition in her eyes replaced by a weary, bruised humility. She had come alone. Commissioner Thompson is in federal custody, she said, her voice flat. The entire Sea Glass board is being indicted. It's a clean sweep. She paused, her gaze shifting from me to Lucian and back again. I'm sorry, she said, the words sounding foreign on her tongue. I took a shortcut. I thought I could play the game better than they could, but I just ended up becoming another piece on their board. You played it better. You played it straight. Sorry doesn't fix a man's life, I said, my voice soft but unyielding. I had anticipated this. On the way to the hospital, I'd had Cass's legal team draft a document. I pulled the folded papers from my bag and placed them on the small table next to her. This is a legally binding affidavit, I explained. It details the IFCD's deliberate suppression of exculpatory evidence in the case of John Quintana. It also contains a commitment to a full, internal review of every case the commissioner prosecuted in the last 10 years. You'll sign it, and you'll make it public by sunrise. She read it, her expression hardening for a moment at the sheer audacity of my demand, but then it crumbled. She knew she had no choice. She took a pen from her pocket and signed her name with a sharp, angry stroke. Justice, finally, had a signature. After she left, the doctor finished his work. Lucian flexed his bandaged hand, his eyes finding mine in the quiet room. What I do, the world I move in, has always been in the shadows, he said, his voice a low rumble. My father built it that way. It was a reaction to a system he believed was corrupt. He looked at his own hand, at the fresh stitches, but the shadows corrupt, too. It's time to let in some light. He looked up at me, his gaze clear and direct. I'm going to burn the old routes, the Iris and Camellia networks, all of it. I want to build something else, a clean infrastructure, legitimate medical logistics for underserved regions. What my father started with yours, a debt repaid with truth. I want to build a business on that. The offer hung in the air between us. It was more than a business plan. It was a confession and a proposal, a promise of a different future. If you're serious, I said, meeting his gaze without hesitation, if you really mean it, I'll walk that road with you. We didn't go back to one of his sterile, empty penthouses. He came home with me. My apartment, with its worn wooden floors and mismatched furniture, felt like a sanctuary after the cold, hard lines of his world. I switched on the small lamp in the kitchen, casting a warm, yellow glow over the room. The rain had started again, a gentle, rhythmic tapping against the window pane that felt soothing, like the city was finally washing itself clean. I had a pot of tomato sauce simmering on the stove from the day before, a simple, comforting habit. The rich aroma of garlic, oregano, and simmering tomatoes filled the small space. We were both exhausted, wounded in our own ways, but here, in the simple warmth of my kitchen, the world felt a little less dangerous. We didn't talk about the raid, or Malric, or the IFCD. Instead, we cooked. A simple pasta. I put the water on to boil while he, despite his injured arm, insisted on chopping fresh basil. We stood side by side at the counter, the space between us filled with a quiet, comfortable energy. His hand brushed against mine as we both reached for the olive oil, a simple, accidental touch that felt more intimate than any of the passionate kisses we had shared. I saw him smile, a real smile, not the ghost of one he usually wore. It transformed his face, chasing the shadows from his eyes. The warmth of the kitchen felt like an umbrella, shielding two people who had spent too long in the cold. As we ate, sitting at my small kitchen table, we traded stories, not of corporate espionage or criminal empires, but of the people we had been before all of this. I told him about growing up in Queens, about my Italian grandfather who smelled of sawdust and espresso. I told him how my grandfather would fill our small apartment with the sound of old Italian love songs every Sunday morning, teaching me the language through the lyrics of passion and heartbreak. In return, he gave me a piece of himself, a shard of his past he kept locked away. He told me about his mother, a single parent who worked 2 jobs, and how some nights, when the rent was late and the heat was off, they would ride the all-night bus until morning, sleeping on the back seat just to stay warm. He spoke of a childhood not of wealth and power, but of survival and a fierce, protective love for the woman who had given him everything. We were stripping away the armor, piece by piece, revealing the vulnerable, human core beneath. The trust we had built in the crucible of danger was now deepening into a different kind of connection, something quieter, softer, but infinitely stronger. After we cleared the dishes, we stood by the sink, the rain still tapping at the window. The warm, yellow light of the kitchen seemed to draw us closer. He reached out, his uninjured hand coming up to my face, with a tenderness that made my heart ache. He gently brushed a stray curl of hair back from my forehead. The simple, domestic gesture was so full of care, so unguarded, that it broke through the last of my defenses. I leaned into his touch, my own hands coming up to wrap around his neck. I rested my forehead against his, our eyes closing. We just stood there for a long moment, breathing each other in, a silent communion in the heart of my home. Then he kissed me, a long, slow kiss that tasted of wine and tomato sauce and a future I was just beginning to believe in. His bandaged hand came to rest on my waist, a steadying, warm presence. The intensity of the moment built, a slow, rising tide of emotion and sensation. It was a different kind of fire than before, not the wild burn of adrenaline, but the deep, radiant heat of a hearth. When I felt it becoming too much, I gently squeezed the fingers of the hand resting on his neck, a silent signal. He understood immediately. He eased the pressure of the kiss, pulling back just enough to look at me, his eyes dark and soft in the warm light. "Slowness," he whispered, his voice a rough, gentle caress, is its own kind of intensity. He was right. He took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine, and led me from the kitchen to the living room. We sank onto the old, comfortable sofa, the one that was piled with blankets and books. He didn't let me go. He simply held me, his arms a safe harbor. We moved with the slow, languid rhythm of 2 people who had all the time in the world, guided by touch and breath and the unspoken language of trust. The thin fabric of our clothes was the only barrier, a fragile boundary in a world of raw, honest connection. His whispers in Italian were no longer about business or deception. They were strands of silk, weaving a new story around us. And there, in the quiet of my living room, with the rain for a soundtrack, the camera of my memory pulls away. It leaves the two of us, tangled together under a soft wool blanket, two silhouettes in the dim light. There is no need for more detail, no need to chart the geography of the night. There is only the profound, unshakable truth of two souls finding sanctuary in one another, and the steady, quiet rhythm of our hearts beating as one. The next morning, I woke to the feeling of sunlight on my face. He was awake before me, sitting in the armchair across from my bed, simply watching me sleep. When my eyes fluttered open and met his, he smiled that rare, genuine smile again, in his gaze. I saw a man who looked like he had finally, after a lifetime of searching, been given permission to belong somewhere. A newspaper lay on the floor beside him, delivered by an early morning carrier. The headline, in bold, black letters, told the story of our victory. Aurora leak exposes sea glass conspiracy. IFCD faces radical reform. Carthage Hall was a secular cathedral built to the god of civic duty. Its marble floors, soaring ceilings, and heavy oak paneling were designed to make the individual feel small and the institution feel eternal. I stood at a witness podium, a single microphone in front of me, and felt anything but small. I felt like the fulcrum on which the entire city was turning. I was there as a technical witness, the voice that could translate the complex digital crimes of heliotrope and sea glass into a narrative a grand jury could understand. I spoke of blockchain ledgers and off-chain wallets, of tokenized assets and encrypted communication. I used the data Maya had compiled and the insights I had gleaned to paint a clear, undeniable picture of corruption that reached the highest levels of the IFCD. Lucian was there, sitting in the back row of the public gallery, a ghost in a well-tailored suit. He was just another anonymous face in the crowd, but I could feel his presence, a dark, warm anchor in the sea of faces. The dominoes fell one by one with a satisfying public crash. The IFCD commissioner was officially removed from his post, his career ending in disgrace. Heliotrope's assets were seized, its corporate structure collapsing under the weight of its own fraud. The Sea Glass Fund was frozen, its charitable mask ripped away to reveal the ugly face of Malric's enterprise beneath. And then came the moment I had waited 7 years for. A federal prosecutor, prompted by Nora Liddell's signed affidavit, stood and read a formal, public statement officially exonerating my father, John Quintana, of all charges, citing a posthumous commendation for his life-saving actions. A murmur went through the hall. The truth was finally in the official record. When the hearing adjourned, the hall erupted into a controlled chaos of reporters and lawyers. Cass and a small, discreet team materialized around me, guiding me toward a side exit. We stepped out into the bright afternoon sun, and the chaos became a roar. News vans lined the street, cameras flashing, reporters shouting my name. Cass's men formed a tight circle, moving me toward a waiting car. That's when the last remnant of Malric's crew made their desperate, final play. It wasn't an army, just one man, his face a mask of furious desperation, who had somehow slipped through the security cordon. He broke through the line of reporters, a glint of metal in his hand. Cass's team moved to intercept, but the man was fast, his trajectory aimed directly at me. Time seemed to slow. I saw him coming, a blur of motion and malice, but then another blur, faster and more precise, intercepted him. It was Lucian. He had crossed the space from the back of the crowd in a handful of heartbeats. He chose, in that split second, to step out of the shadows and into the blinding glare of the world's attention. He didn't throw a punch. His movements were a fluid, brutal poetry of force and redirection. He deflected the man's arm, the weapon clattering to the pavement, and used the attacker's own momentum to drive him to the ground, pinning him with an effortless, inescapable weight. And then the world exploded in light. 100 camera flashes went off at once, capturing the image in a series of strobing, stop-motion frames. Lucian Vassallo, the Phantom, the city's most powerful and invisible man, his face unobscured, his identity revealed to the world as he knelt over my would-be attacker. The headlines the next day were a firestorm. Shadow financier saves star witness. The public narrative was torn. Was he a dangerous crime lord or a strange, reluctant hero? He had become the city's most fascinating and terrifying mystery. Nora Liddell, now acting as interim director and cleaning her own house, came to us with an offer, a way out. The Civilian Citizen Protection Program, she explained, sitting across from us in the quiet of Lucian's now exposed penthouse. It's not witness protection. It's a clean slate, a new identity, a new life, in exchange for his full, systemic testimony on the city's underworld. He can disappear, and he can be safe. Lucian looked at me, his gray eyes holding a world of conflict. I can do it, he said, his voice quiet. I can disappear. It would keep you safe. Truly safe. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. We don't disappear, I said, my voice firm, our gazes locking. We transform. That night, we returned to the place where our truth had begun, the rooftop of the Vireo Hotel. A warm June wind swept across the city, carrying the distant sounds of a summer festival. I placed 2 envelopes on the small table between us. This is our choice, so I said, not theirs. Envelope A contained the paperwork for Nora's program, a life of safety and shadows, a permanent retreat from the world. Envelope B contained a business plan, a detailed proposal I had spent the last day drafting. It was a plan to legitimize the Vassallo Trust's shipping assets, partnering with the nonprofit Marble Archives Institute to create a transparent, secure medical logistics network. It was a path forward, into the light. He didn't even open envelope A. He picked up envelope B and read it, his expression intense. He saw the work, the research, the belief I had poured into it. He saw a future. He picked up the pen I had placed on the table. His hand trembled, just slightly, as he signed his name at the bottom. It was the first time in his life he had chosen to build something in the open instead of hiding it in the dark. The distant sound of news helicopters, which had been circling for hours, began to fade as the story moved on. Below us on the streets, the Skyline Audio Network, which we had used as a weapon, was now playing soft, ambient jazz. We stood by the railing, side by side, watching the city lights. We were tired, bone-deep tired, but we were smiling. We're not perfectly clean, I said, looking out at the glittering expanse, but we're transparent from now on. He took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine. From now on, he echoed, his voice a solemn vow. He turned me to face him, and he kissed me. It wasn't the wild, desperate kiss of our first night here, nor the deep, confirming kiss in the parking garage. This one was different. It was a kiss of endurance, of promise. It was the kiss of 2 people who had walked through hell together and had chosen to stand in the light, unbowed. Just as we broke apart, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Nora. The words on the screen made my breath catch in my throat. It's done. The president just signed the full federal pardon. Your father's record is wiped clean. It's like it never happened. A sound, half sob, half laugh, escaped my lips. The final knot, the one that had been tied around my heart for 7 long years, finally came undone. The strength I had maintained for so long finally gave way to a tidal wave of pure, overwhelming relief. I buried my face in Lucian's shoulder, and I cried. I cried for the years of injustice, for the father I missed, and for the impossible, beautiful truth that had finally won. He just held me, his arms a fortress, letting me release it all. In the distance, A burst of fireworks from the summer festival lit up the night sky, a silent, colorful rain celebrating a victory they knew nothing about. When the tears subsided, we left the rooftop, hand in hand, and walked down to the street. As we stepped onto the pavement, the music from a nearby Skyline speaker changed. A soft, familiar melody began to play. It was an old Italian love song, one my grandfather used to sing on Sunday mornings. We walked into the heart of the city, no longer hiding, no longer running, and I leaned my head on his shoulder, the final words of our story whispering from my lips, for his ears only. It all started with a phone call in Italian and a man who said, "Don't let her leave." Thank you for listening to this story. I'm so curious to know where in the world you're tuning in from. Let me know in the comments below so we can connect and share our thoughts. And if you enjoyed this journey, please consider subscribing to my channel, Mafia Boss Stories. Give this video a like and support us further by hitting the hype button to help this story be heard by more people.